Hello and welcome to Let's Talk CanQueer, the show that brings you the biggest issues facing gender and sexual minorities living in Canada. My name is Luke Smith, and today's show is very much a discussion around trans rights in Canada and primarily in Ontario. Joining me today is Dan Irving, who is an associate professor at Carleton University, and we have Jean Charbonneau, who is the president of Gender Mosaic, which is Canada's oldest
transgender social and support group.
Transgender social and support group. I did not want to get that wrong. Also joining us from Gender Mosaic is Alex Thompson and Sophia Cassivi, who are both activists and members at Gender Mosaic.
Hello. Hi.
So I'm going to throw it back to you, and if there's anything in particular that you want to mention about your background, where you work, and how this particular topic is of importance to you, then that'll help give us a bit of background as to who you all are. So I'll throw it to you first, Dan.
Sure. Well, I am a professor, and I started researching trans issues when I transitioned myself in the late 1990s, so about 1998, 1999. And I have the personal experience. I also pursue this in terms of my vocation. And I just had the pleasure of releasing a book, Trans Activism in Canada, a reader, with Rupert Raj. So one of the, with all due respect, oldest trans activists in Canada. So.
I think we'll lean towards most experienced, maybe.
There you go. That's better, yeah.
Awesome. Jean, now obviously you are the president of Gender Mosaic, which kind of is self-explanatory, but do you want to go into it in a little bit more detail?
Well, actually, I was elected president of Gender Mosaic for the first time. I've been a member of Gender Mosaic on and off, perhaps for the past 15 years. 15 years ago was when I began to slowly transition. And back then it was because I needed a group that would help to support me in the beginnings of this particular transition. Now at this point, it's not so much that I need the group itself, but I want to contribute to my society and to the trans community through the group, and Gender Mosaic is a perfect opportunity to do so. It's a growing group. It's attracting more and more members every time. We have all kinds of events that we do. We have a monthly social, a couple of barbecues a year, a fantastic Christmas party where we actually attract people from Toronto and Montreal. Even to it, it's a good group. If anyone is interested in knowing more about Gender Mosaic, our website gendermosaic.com explains it all.
And Alex, everybody here obviously brings a very unique perspective to the conversation.
Yes.
What kind of brings you into this dialogue?
Well, I guess I was one of Gender Mosaic's little F to M's that joined their group not long ago. Back in 2010, there was a committee put together for the Trans Day of Remembrance. Actually, it's coming up, I believe, too, shortly. I've been on and off with Gender Mosaic, but with them, they took me in and they changed their bylaws to be able to accommodate more F to M's. So I guess I bring the perspective of a younger demographic, if ever, I think.
I just want to quickly clarify for the audience that F to M is female to male.
Exactly, yeah.
And the Trans Day of Remembrance is observed in November, I believe?
Yes.
Yeah.
November 20th, usually.
Usually, yeah.
Awesome. And Sophia, I believe that you are a past president of Gender Mosaic.
I was a very lucky president for 3 years of Gender Mosaic, just before Jeanne. And the interesting thing about all the activism that we've been doing and everything that's been going on with the gender community, the transgender community, is that the more it goes, the more the diversity unites. And this is the most important thing for all of us throughout Canada. So I was lucky to be there when we got Gender Mosaic to be a new way, a new life into the group and bringing it to more diversity, making sure that the word mosaic is really sticking to our bylaws and to our existence and who we are. So now I'm trying to keep more presence, because like Jeanne says, when you arrive in Gender Mosaic, I arrived maybe 12 years ago, you arrive at the beginning and you need help. And then after that you start passing on. So we have a good rotation in there, and that's good. And we have a lot of new girls and a lot of new guys that come in, so that is great.
And I think the issue of trans rights is a very big area of discussion. I want to give the audience a bit of a context. Trans Pulse, which I imagine is a study that you're familiar, they surveyed 433 trans individuals, I believe in Canada, 98 of whom reported facing discrimination, which is an astronomically high number. Another 25% of them experienced physical violence, and around 43% had attempted suicide. An American study of 6,450 participants revealed that they had double the rate of unemployment, and 47% had been fired or not hired or denied promotion on the grounds of being trans. This is definitely a very substantial issue that Canada and many other countries are grappling with from a rights perspective. But there's also a lot of really good work being done here in Canada, which is quite exciting. And I know that Gender Mosaic is very much on the forefront of the work being done here in Canada, in particular with Bill C-279, the bill to amend the Federal Human Rights Code and the Hate Crimes Code. One of the first questions I have is pretty much the simplest question in the book. Written down is the simplest question in the book. What is trans? Like, what does that mean for the sake of our audience?
I think it depends on the context, really. I mean, when I first read the question that you sent us, what is trans, I immediately thought it should be who. And I think that's really important, because trans people are just that, people. So when we want to talk about rights, the first thing we want to do is recognize that humanity, and that trans people have been an integral part of society, even though not recognized in terms of our gender identities for years. Like, I mean, always, really. Mm-hmm. So that's the first place I go to. Is just trans is a gender identity that many people have, and is a process to get to femininity and masculinity, male or womanhood, manhood or womanhood.
Yeah, or men and women. Mm-hmm. Such as, like trans and transgender are pretty much, but right now the fashionable word is trans. It used to be always said transgender, but there's two mentalities in there. One that says that transgender is one thing, and the other one that says that transgender is the umbrella word. Mm-hmm. So let's say that trans is the umbrella word. There's about like 12 to 15 different labels of different identities, gender identities, and gender expression also, that mixes under this umbrella. Mm-hmm. A bit like the word construction. You have somebody doing the nails and the other one doing the cement, and the plumber and the electrician. Same thing with trans. It would be like the word construction or the word musicians. Mm-hmm. You have the bass player, the drummer, and everything. So trans is pretty much the umbrella word for the whole community in itself, within all those different labels that we have, like gender queer, or some people don't like those words, but she-males, trannies, transsexuals, cross-dressers, cross-gender, bigender, two-spirited, multi-spirited. Tons of words. That is
a phenomenal list, phenomenal list. I know that a lot of it is reflective of history and lessons learned. For example, way back when, she-males was very much a derogatory term, and that has very largely been laid to bed. I'm glad to say it's not the most appropriate language. And you're very much right. Trans is what's most commonly being used, but it encompasses so much. I want to quickly also establish for our viewers the difference between trans and cis, which I believe is based in medicine as in chemistry, because like elements are either trans or cis. I think it means aligned and not aligned. Am I on the right page?
Essentially, from what I gather, cis just means identifying with the gender that was assigned to you at birth, simply speaking, and trans means really not identifying with the gender that was assigned to you at birth. If I might just add a little bit to the discussion, trans has a number of different labels, but actually one should begin to not look at gender as male and female. There's actually a whole wide spectrum of various gender identities and gender expressions, and those are now starting to be recognized and appreciated, and I hope one day even be totally celebrated. Excuse me, my stuttering.
I think you raise a brilliant point. And in an earlier episode, we were discussing trans and gender creative youth, where the question really was raised that if you only have two options, male and female, there's going to be people who can't fit nicely into those two boxes. And you're very much right. It is one end and the other end of a spectrum. And trans very much exists kind of in between there in some shape or form. With language that is constantly developing, that's culturally specific. For example, two-spirited is very culturally specific.
But if I can add something.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, these terms are made only because of, I mean, I think you touched on it a little bit, Dan, where, you know, people need to categorize what they see, right? I mean, I think the youth of today are kind of just going with the flow, so to speak, and I think that's great. And I mean, trans allows the opportunity to just kind of broaden everything out and not have to sometimes specifically say what they want to categorize themselves as. So there's the humanity behind, but you still have to put a word to it, unfortunately. So that's what I guess people choose to put it as, if that makes any.
No, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think it brings it back very nicely to the point that you made earlier, where the question really should be, who is trans, as opposed to what is trans? And it's really bringing in that lived experiences of people who are trans. And I'm going to use trans as a nice umbrella term for the rest of the show, so that we don't completely confuddle our audience. Do you have any other comments on terms and definitions before we begin?
I just have one. So we've said two-spirited a few times, but I think in terms of trans too, I mean, trans is also a method of study, and I think sometimes we forget that the gender binary that defines trans is a colonial one, and it erases a lot of indigenous knowledges. And so two-spirit was actually a term that came about in the 1990s, where indigenous people from the United States and Canada came together to reclaim what had been lost through centuries of colonial genocide, essentially. And so I have a tense relationship between two-spirit and trans, just because I think sometimes trans activists don't acknowledge that we need to take into consideration more than just gender identity, but other relations of power, such as colonialism.
I think you're absolutely right. It is a very rich and diverse history and a very, very complex issue. We're going to be looking at some of the social elements in just a few minutes when you join us after the break. This has been Let's Talk CanQueer, and I've been Luke Smith. Hello and welcome back to Let's Talk CanQueer, the show that brings you the biggest issues facing gender and sexual minorities living in Canada. Actually, even the show's name kind of really hits on the question of what is trans. We opted for gender minorities, GSMs, which is a very, very, very new terminology in terms of what's being used. I want to really kind of tease out some of these definitions, just in case that there is any confusion, because I know that many in the audience might recognize transsexuals as being the term that's used. Are you able to kind of work through and let us know what some of these mean before we move on?
I could begin on